Hi, friends. This is Danielle from sibylslab Cartomantics, coming at you with a different kind of deck list. I don't know about you. Actually, I'm guessing. I feel pretty confident saying that, like me, in some ways, you feel like the world is going a little topsy-turvy, a little upside down. For a solid half decade, I felt like that. A world pandemic will do that. And regardless of your socio-political outlook, I think it's fair to say that things are a little dark mirror right now. So I think that because things feel a little post apocalyptic or just regular apocalyptic, I feel like I'm living in a dystopia. It really is standing out to me, dystopian art and aesthetics. And I'm noticing that I have a few decks that really fit within that category of imagery. And I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at those, see what decks really suit that, and think about what it would mean to do something that we might understand to be a form of dystopian shadow work. What that would look like. I'm making that term up, so it's not as if there's something officially called dystopian shadow work, but I do think it's an interesting framework and concept, and it takes advantage of some of the great, weird, interesting, unique decks that are around. So I thought that those were worth sharing. So I have two purposes. I do love to start a video by explaining my purposes. I wanted to clarify what I mean. What is a dystopia? What do I mean by the notion of dystopian work, shadowy, shadowish work? What are the foundations, the themes? How do we do that work? And second, I want to share three decks that employ this kind of aesthetic and visual archetype and architecture, what this symbolism can look like. These are three very different decks and very different approaches to the category and concept of dystopia. So there's a lot of room here to approach the notion of dystopia in different ways. There are different ways that you can understand how the world is upside down. So we'll be taking a look at a range of those ways across three different decks. We are going to start with, so I'll do flip throughs of decks as I talk a little bit about whatever part of this I want to get through and share. The first deck, though, that we're going to be looking at is called Eldritch Overload. All of these decks are still in print and still available, and I will include the link, the details, and publisher and link and all that stuff in the video description below. This is available by Weirdworks via the publisher's website. And for this flip through, I'd like to talk a little bit about the basics of dystopia as a concept. Before I do that, though, I'll say I think that the level of detail in these images are so gorgeous and like full and rich and absorbing that I kind of don't care how creepy some of it feels because the colors are so alive. They feel so immersive. It's an unreal environment. That's kind of the point. But it's so detailed and emotionally activating that it can feel real. I mean, this hermit, I feel the presence and energy and intention of this hermit. This is a very specific kind of approach to the Wheel of Fortune card. So this is my favorite, I'll admit, my favorite of the three decks. It's the one that I would say that I've worked, let me take a look. Yeah, definitely the one that I've worked most with. And the guidebook that you can buy separately is fantastic. So I would definitely recommend it, although you don't need it. It comes with a little white book, and I think that the images really speak for themselves in a lot of ways. So, what is dystopia? What is the concept of a dystopia in that genre? Quote, this is from the dictionary. I love a dictionary definition. It is an imagined state or society in which there is great suffering or injustice, typically one that is totalitarian or post apocalyptic. As I was looking at that description, I mean, I know the dystopian genre just from culture, right? There are things that I've read and watched that I understand to be dystopic in nature. So I didn't think in a sophisticated way about precisely how I would define something to be of the dystopian genre before figuring out how I wanted to summarize it here, but I was really struck by the strength of this language. There is great suffering or injustice. That's really profound. I mean, it's great suffering. There's nothing soft or flexible about that. That's really confronting and insistent on a sense of unease, a sense of anxiety, and an upside down world that isn't just bizarre, but is actually awful. I'm not going to take it back that things feel dystopic, even knowing the strength of that description, but I will say I was struck by that. I found that to be a powerful framing. Now, we see the dystopian genre articulated and represented in a number of ways. There are a lot of subgenres, in other words. We see it in cyberpunk or biopunk. I would say that this deck has a cyberpunk vibe. There's dystopian realism, so a world that feels very familiar and yet like has just enough of a difference that totalitarian, unsettling, oppressive landscape feels distressingly real and possible. And that's as opposed to this world, which is Technicolor. And I feel confident that there's not like this 10 of Wands happening down the street from me. There's also environmental, or what gets called ectopian dystopia. So that is like a sort of environmental collapse and apocalypse. There's plain old post-apocalyptic in a world-ending way, and so on. So that's just a few of them. I've said a little bit about this already, but why is this theme emerging for me right now? This theme deals with dynamics of sociopolitical power and state oppression. Really, this theme emerges for me because of the notion of power outside of me, power in an external way that is determinative and inverted and alarming. There are a lot of things out of my control that feel very high stakes. It's not just a normal out of my control, but it's an out of like an unease about power that is informing my inner life more than I've ever seen that happen before. And there's also the anxiety I think a lot of us feel about the acceleration of technological advancement, the emergence of a really sophisticated AI, and the possibility of displaced human ingenuity and productivity. With that in mind, I mean, it's unsurprising that it would feel very visceral, the themes associated with dystopia. I do want to list a few examples of dystopian literature and film that are really kind of pop culture-y. In no particular order, we have The Handmaid's Tale. That's the Margaret Atwood novel that has become a multi-season Hulu series. That is a dystopian future. There's the Black Mirror Netflix series, which my students recommended, like for better or worse, and is phenomenal and alarming. Then we see like the sort of YA genre that takes off of The Hunger Games and Divergent, those trilogies of novels and film series. Those are dystopian, totalitarian, oppressive, post-apocalyptic futures. And this one comes to mind because I saw it recently. I saw 28 Years Later. There's 28 Days Later and zombie films like that, many of which are apocalyptic and dystopian in nature. So we see that there are lots of ways in which the future can be awful and horrifying. Um, and it's worth thinking about. So that's just a few examples. The second deck is the Tenebrae Tarot. This is like my best effort at pronouncing it. Tenebrae, Teknebrae, Tenebrae Tarot by Pixel Occult. Linen cardstock, so very slippery. I love to shuffle, difficult to keep still. This is available in Pixel Occult Etsy shop. This is one of several decks by them that I think fall within this category of post-apocalyptic. Some are better known. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this particular version. I'm pretty sure that they call this a cyberpunk dystopian body of images and theme for their deck. So let's take a look at this, and I'll share what I think are the particular gifts and challenges of this kind of work. Noting that I made a video about the difficulty and interest of black and white decks. I've worked with this deck not at all. Putting this video together has actually been somewhat inspirational for me. It makes me want to pick up the deck. So that said, I think it's powerful imagery, but I have yet to sort of explore the possibilities associated with this particular deck. All right, the gifts of this kind of dystopian, what I'm calling shadowish work, dystopian shadowish work. Images like these tap into, as I was describing for myself, anxieties around power and technology. This engages with internal emotions that are triggered and I think unknowingly inform our behavior. So I would say, for example, it's pretty clear to me if I meet somebody who reminds me of a former partner or ex-friend or something, and I find myself having concerning or aberrant ideas or behaviors, right? Like that kind of self-investigation and examination becomes a little obvious. And I don't say that dismissively. Like, it is easier for me, I guess what I'm saying is it's easier for me to understand the nature of what is worth exploring and journaling about and discovering. It is less obvious to me, even making this video, precisely how my anxieties around, for example, AI inform my choices and behavior. And yet, I would suspect that my concerns about power structures in the global landscape or my increasing thoughts and discomforts with the acceleration of technological normalized advancements probably determine lots of things about my mood, my attitude, my choices. So working with a deck that is framed by these kinds of images and sort of archetypes and stories that are grounded in the source of like dystopian concerns and frustrations and imagined landscapes, these sort of like techno horror landscapes, that becomes easier and more natural. If it's something that's a little less familiar or more complicated, working with these images can make it easier. And approaching this work with intention rather than thinking maybe it'll come up, right? Like if I have some shadows around anxieties about being replaced, my work writing, doing scholarly or creative writing, there's a lot of AI that can do that now. I don't find that to be like of particular distress right now, but it is increasing. Like it's something that I could see becoming distressing over time. I know a lot of artists and other people are really distressed at the growth of AI and the replacement of human creativity. So I could think maybe that's just naturally going to come up in my journaling, in my shadow work, in my whatever. Um, but approaching it with intention, I think is more fruitful because it's such, at least for me, it's such a blindness. I am so disinclined to think that maybe my stuff is associated with like emerging totalitarianism that it takes a little bit of intention to do that work. Um, and these images, I mean, like, let's look at this Seven of Cups. Seven of Cups is not normally a card that makes me uncomfortable in its imagery. I don't think it's a good card or a bad card. It's intoxication, it's choice, it's all kinds of good and bad things, quote unquote. But I find the traditional and most interpretations of the Seven of Cups to be especially interesting or attractive or fun or whatever. Not so here. These kinds of decks, at least for me and my relationship to different kinds of dystopian art, mean that there are no escape hatches for me. There's no way for me to avoid, to give myself an out, even if I want to maintain a willful blindness around some of these themes in my mind or in my life. So that's a real benefit of working with decks like this. If I want to do this work, if I judge myself ready and think that it would be fruitful, I need a tool that's going to insist that I see what I really, really am going to resist seeing. That said, so this forces us through the uneasiness. And yet, right? Like, I watch Black Mirror. I've binged it. I've binged a season or two of what is it, The Handmaid's Tale, or I've read dystopian fiction intentionally and for fun. So there is a way that like there is an escapism to be found in those in the genre of the dystopian. And in part, the literature scholar in me wants to think about how part of our fixation with an enjoyment of that is that it acts in contrast to the world around us, however uncomfortable. So it almost like makes things feel positive in comparison, because no matter how bad things are, the narrative of the Hunger Games is like 10 times worse. So there is a kind of escapism in this imagery. There's something that can be enjoyable about it in the way that dark dystopias and those narratives are escapist. So that's a possible gift of the work. It is a site in tarot that I visually rarely visit, and so it's novel and interesting and engaging. That said, here are some challenges of this work. It is easy, I think, to overestimate our readiness to do this kind of shadowish work. How would I say this? Like, working with themes around oppression and power and totalitarian infrastructure, that is big. And it is like really destabilizing to work with those themes. I think, at least for me, more destabilizing than some more traditional kind of explorations of pain or vulnerability. Thinking about the way that power is weaponized in the world around me is profoundly upsetting and distressing. And I think it's easy to underestimate the degree to which we need to be careful doing this work and really sure that we're ready to do this work. So that is something that can be a challenge, being clear with ourselves about what we're really asking ourselves to do and ensuring our readiness. Also, the only other thing I would say about challenges, I do think that it's important for every deck to have some kind of respite available. So not soothing or comforting images necessarily. All those are, those are always nice. But I don't think that's necessary. I do, however, think that it is important that there are images of no or low intensity in a given deck. And depending upon your taste and affinity, a lot of these decks might have no such place. Everything feels kind of intense or exaggerated, and that can be unhelpful. So that is something to be mindful about in choosing the kind of dystopian deck that you select to work with, if that's something that you do. We don't want everything that you see in the cards to be stress stimulating. That is not productive, in my humble opinion. I edged this, by the way. It does not come edged. All right. Our final deck is the Sci-Fi Tarot. I loathe these backs, you guys. So Todd Alcott is known best for pulp tarot and horror tarot, especially pulp tarot. This deck is available on the publisher's website, the Philosophers Guild, I think it is. The link will be in the video description. But I loathe the backs of these cards. I don't like the backs of any of his decks, and I love the pulp tarot, and I really like the horror tarot, but man, his card backs, not loving. That's sad. That's my complaint. This is the Sci-Fi Tarot, and as we do a flip through, I'm going to list what I think are some good themes and journal prompts to consider if you want to dig into this work. So let's say that you want to get into doing what I'm calling a dystopian shadowy work. Here are some prompts. So write them down and style them into your own spreads if that's something that's interesting to you. Noting, of course, I'm always going to give the caveat that these are for, I think they're really good for self-reflection and stimulation. Some of these questions are really going to stand out to you either because they're triggering or compelling. Whichever ones give you either kind of strong reaction would probably be fruitful to do some journaling with. But if they're really triggering, it's always going to be helpful to get a therapist. I'm always going to advocate for therapy, people. Like, I am a child of my generation and a big advocate for the support of professional mental health providers. But I find this stuff, these cards, this journaling, this self-exploration to be profoundly supportive and deepening. And so here are some themes that I think fit this deepening. You'll see that there are, as with his other decks, these kind of little quotes and kitschy approaches to design that I think are phenomenal. Like, I love the styling of a lot of these images, like they're movie posters, and like the building in of things that are not keywords but are stimulating phrases. I absolutely love it. And I'm not a person who likes keywords on my tarot cards. Or even on most of my oracle cards. All right. The only other thing I'll say before I get into the list of themes and prompts is, obviously, because these are inspired by the dystopian genre, they're going to sound really socio-political. Like, they're going to sound like prompts that are associated with, like, questions of global politics. Please remember that this is about thinking about how the theme of dystopia serves as a metaphor for our inner landscape. So the first theme I have is surveillance and privacy. We're applying that theme and its questions to our inner emotional, intellectual, spiritual lives. Certainly use these for examination of, the external world if you're really interested in political discourse. But that's not why I'm providing them. However you use them, I think they can be pretty provocative. So the first theme of surveillance and privacy. Here are some questions. How do I feel watched? Who is watching? It's a good one for court cards. Who is watching? What are my boundaries around visibility? If you watched my video on 8 decks for dark rooms, I have pretty strong opinions about the difference between accessibility and privacy and hiding. Like, you don't owe anyone access to your private life via social media or anything else. But if you have anxiety around sharing access with people, or if you feel surveilled or you're hiding from surveillance, that is a different concern altogether. So consider everything within that frame. More questions. Is my desire for privacy serving me? What is the cost of surrendering to expectations around visibility and accessibility? Here's the big one. The category, or the theme rather, of truth and propaganda. This feels very of the moment. Let me look at my list. What are my sources for truth? How do I feel manipulated or deceived? How does my insecurity around access to information, around access to accurate information, disrupt my confidence and well-being? Big questions. Next theme. Conformity and individuality. In what ways am I expected? You guys, I have to tell you, I loathe a sideways card in the middle of a deck, but we're going to go with it. It's kind of kitschy. It's charming, I think. Okay, so back to the questions. In what ways am I expected to conform? Who imposes these expectations? So where do they come from? How do I assert my individuality? And where do I feel punished for resisting conformity? So what is the cost of not conforming? The next theme, complicity and resistance. Where is there a dissonance between my values and my behaviors? Who do I align my values with? And does this community strengthen or undermine me? Where in my life do I express resistance? What person or groups represent judgments of approval or disapproval that shape my choices? Last category, cultural and social collapse. This is a big one in dystopian fiction and genre and art. How am I anxious about the shifts in cultural and social norms? How does this anxiety inform my defensive strategies? What cultural and social changes reflect an optimistic outlook that might get lost in my anxiety? Love a Time magazine reference. What are my proactive responses to these signs of collapse and change? And how is my outlook insightful and accurate, and where is it alarmist and catastrophic? It was really important to me when I was writing these prompts to think about how we might be fatalistic about things feeling like dystopian, a dystopian reality when they're really not, right? So I want us to explore all of the ways that that framework can really provide context for understanding our journeys, but understanding too that sometimes we can catastrophize and things aren't collapsing and it just feels like they are. Closing question. I'm going to use the first deck. Well, you know what? We're going to use Pixel Occult's deck, the Tenebrae Tarot. Our closing question for the collective, as we like to do on this channel, And I'm using this one because of the linen cardstock. Ugh, it's so delicious. What dystopian theme is emerging for our consideration this week? So we've talked about different themes. Let's go through that list again. We have cultural and social collapse, complicity and resistance, conformity and individuality, truth and propaganda, surveillance and privacy. So the theme may be one of those. It may be something else that has to do with the dystopian genre. But whatever it is, what dystopian theme is emerging for our consideration this week? Okay. These are in order, so I'm going to pull 2 cards, but I'm going to keep shuffling after the first one. Our first card is Ten of Swords. We're going dystopian already. That's a little... This isn't a Six of Cups kind of thing. Maybe we'll get the Sun. Let's see what our second card is. Okay. And Seven of Pentacles. So we have our Ten of Swords and our Seven of Pentacles. These are the cards that tell us what dystopian themes to engage with this week that are emerging. It feels like things are absolutely collapsing and dying. Acknowledge that. And embrace the ending where it exists. Like, there is a way in which things can feel like things are apocalyptic and oh no, and it's the end. But the end of something can serve us so that we can foster the growth of something else. In dystopias and apocalypses, things die, and that's what we notice. This is about fostering the growth of something else and letting something die to leave room for that. So I think that this Ten of Swords is telling us that this death is going to feel very Towers-ish. Like whatever is collapsing is going to feel like a distressing collapse, but the potential for, tending to what is growing and blooming in our lives, what is robust and is deserving of our tending, we need bandwidth for that. So take advantage of what is freed up energetically, like literally our energy, our ability to spend time and mental resources on something. Some of that's going to be freed up by our 10 of Swords wiping out one consideration and obligation. So embrace that second one. All right, final words. Thank you so much for sticking around. I'm always appreciative that people listen to me talk for a lengthy period of time. Hope you learned something of interest and a tip or two that would be compelling to you and for your own practice. There is a blog post that I'm putting up, or that I put up yesterday when I'm posting this video, so Thursday, October 23rd, and it's diving deeper in writing into this theme of dystopian fiction and the genre and symbolism and how that can serve our specific tarot and divination practice. So, and it also provides these prompts in writing, as well as a few different spreads. So follow the link to that post in the description, along with our links to our websites, our socials, how to schedule a reading or book some mentoring. Would love to see you guys soon on the blog or in a reading or for mentoring. And until next time, friends, I will see you in the lab. Bye.